Have you ever found yourself surrounded by people, yet feeling utterly alone? That paradoxical moment when laughter fills the room, conversations buzz around you, and yet you stand there, separated by an invisible wall that no one else seems to see. It's as if you're watching life through a glass pane, seeing everything, hearing everything, but somehow unable to truly touch or be touched by the world beyond. This peculiar pain doesn't announce itself with the drama of acute suffering. Instead, it settles in quietly, like dust gathering in an abandoned room, until one day you realize that loneliness has become your most faithful companion, the silent narrator of your life story. Loneliness doesn't arrive with fanfare. It creeps in through the small cracks of everyday existence, the unreturned text message, the conversation that skims the surface, the birthday celebrated with performative cheer but lacking genuine connection. We've been taught to fear it, to run from it, to see it as evidence of some fundamental flaw in our being. Yet here you are, carrying this weight, perhaps wondering if you're the only one who feels the full gravity of its presence. The modern world has perfected the illusion of connection. We collect friends like digital trading cards, amass followers, and document our lives in carefully curated squares, all while the space between our true selves and others grows wider. The philosopher Kierkegaard called this the sickness unto death, not a physical demise, but the despair of not being truly known, of living behind a mask so convincing that sometimes even you forget what lies beneath it. There exists a particular ache in realizing that your inner landscape, your fears, your dreams, your peculiar way of seeing the world, remains largely unexplored territory to those who claim to know you. You've learned the social choreography perfectly, the right smile at the right time, the appropriate response to, "How are you?" But beneath this performance lies a person yearning to say, "This is who I really am. This is what I truly feel." The nights are often when loneliness speaks most clearly. In that quiet space between wakefulness and sleep, when the distractions fall away, you might find yourself confronting questions that have no easy answers. Who would notice if you simply disappeared? Who knows the real you, not the carefully constructed version you present to the world? In these moments, loneliness isn't just an emotion. It becomes an existential condition. Consider the last time you shared something genuinely meaningful about yourself. Not the polished anecdotes we use as social currency, but something raw and true. Perhaps you've noticed how rarely these moments occur, how the rhythm of modern life seems deliberately designed to prevent them. We move quickly from one surface interaction to another, never staying long enough in one place to risk being truly seen. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being misunderstood, when you speak your truth and watch it be misinterpreted, dismissed, or worse, met with uncomfortable silence. After enough of these moments, many retreat into themselves, deciding that the pain of isolation is preferable to the disappointment of reaching out only to grasp at air. Technology promised to connect us, to shrink the world until distance became meaningless. Yet many of us now find ourselves more isolated than ever, scrolling through highlight reels of others' lives while sitting alone in darkened rooms. We've gained the ability to communicate with anyone, anywhere, at any time, and somehow lost the art of genuine connection in the process. The body knows loneliness before the mind can name it. It manifests as a physical ache, a hollowness in the chest, a tension in the throat when you swallow. Your nervous system, designed over millennia for tribal connection, registers isolation as a threat, setting off silent alarms throughout your being. This is not mere sentimentality, it is biology speaking an ancient truth. Human connection is not a luxury, but a necessity. Perhaps most painful is the loneliness that exists within relationships. The quiet desperation of lying beside someone who doesn't see you, of sharing a home, but not a life. Nietzsche wrote that there are no facts, only interpretations, and nowhere is this more evident than in the gap between how we experience ourselves and how others perceive us. Even in our most intimate moments, we remain, in some essential way, unknown. Throughout history, philosophers have grappled with loneliness not as a temporary emotional state, but as a fundamental condition of human existence. Martin Heidegger spoke of thrownness, the idea that we are cast into this world without choice, ultimately alone in our journey from birth to death. No matter how many companions we gather along the way, certain crossroads must be faced in solitude. Existentialists like Sartre propose that this isolation stems from our unique burden of consciousness. We alone, among all creatures, know that we exist, know that we will die, and must create meaning in the space between. This awareness separates us not only from other species, but from each other. Your experience of being human, your particular fears, joys, and perceptions, remains ultimately untranslatable, even to those closest to you. The ancient Stoics might suggest that your loneliness stems not from isolation itself, but from your judgment of it. Man is disturbed not by things, wrote Epictetus, but by the views he takes of them. Perhaps loneliness feels unbearable because we've been taught to see it as failure rather than as a universal aspect of the human condition, one that has inspired our greatest art, literature, and philosophy. Consider how rarely we create space for authentic solitude, the kind that doesn't seek to escape itself through endless distraction. In our rush to avoid feeling alone, we fill every moment with noise, with content, with the voices of others. Yet paradoxically, this constant connection often deepens our sense of isolation rather than alleviating it. We become strangers to ourselves, unable to hear our own thoughts above the din. Kierkegaard distinguished between ordinary loneliness and what he called the dizziness of freedom, that vertiginous moment when we realize that no one can choose our path for us, that we alone must decide who we are and what matters. This existential solitude can be terrifying, but it also contains the seeds of authentic selfhood. Only in confronting our fundamental aloneness can we begin to build genuine connections with others. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of suffering, including the suffering of loneliness. We cling to idealized visions of connection, to the belief that if only we found the right person or community, our isolation would dissolve. But what if loneliness isn't always something to be cured? What if it sometimes serves as a necessary teacher, revealing truths about ourselves that comfort would keep hidden? There's a concept in Japanese philosophy called mono no aware, the pathos of things, the gentle sadness in recognizing the impermanence of all connections. Every relationship, no matter how profound, exists in time. Friends move away, lovers part, parents age, children grow up and forge their own paths. Perhaps loneliness isn't the opposite of connection, but its shadow, the inevitable counterpoint to our attachments in a world where nothing lasts forever. When we speak of loneliness, we often focus on what's missing: the absent friend, the lost love, the community we haven't found. But philosophers like Schopenhauer invite us to consider a different perspective, that our isolation might not be a bug in the system, but a feature of consciousness itself. The very mind that allows us to reach toward others also ensures that we can never completely bridge the gap between self and other. Viktor Frankl, who endured the unimaginable isolation of Nazi concentration camps, concluded that even in our most profound suffering, we retain what he called the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose our attitude toward our circumstances. Your loneliness may be unavoidable at times, but how you carry it, what you learn from it, what you create from it, these remain within your power, even when connection feels most distant. Look closely at your loneliness, and you might discover that it isn't a monolith, but a mosaic, different types of isolation layered upon each other. There's social loneliness, the absence of a satisfying network of friends and acquaintances. There's emotional loneliness, the lack of close attachments or intimate confidants. And perhaps most profound is existential loneliness, the awareness that your internal experience can never be fully shared, that a part of you will always remain untranslatable to others. Our culture has developed sophisticated mechanisms for avoiding confrontation with loneliness. We pathologize it, treating it as a condition to be medicated rather than an experience to be understood. We stigmatize it, equating aloneness with undesirability. We commodify it, selling endless products and experiences that promise connection but deliver only its simulation. These collective defenses reveal how deeply we fear this aspect of our humanity. Consider the ordinary Wednesday evening, returning to an empty apartment after work. The small rituals you've developed, perhaps turning on music to fill the silence, checking social media for the dopamine hit of notification, ordering delivery so the brief interaction with the driver punctuates the solitude. These aren't merely habits. They're adaptations, the ways you've learned to navigate the geography of aloneness. Loneliness often speaks in the language of shame, whispering that your isolation is evidence of some fundamental unworthiness. If you were more interesting, funnier, better looking, more successful, it suggests, you wouldn't be alone. This shame creates a vicious cycle. The more we believe our loneliness makes us unworthy of connection, the more we hide the parts of ourselves that might actually foster genuine intimacy. Have you noticed how loneliness can distort your perception? Research shows that chronic isolation actually changes how we process social information, making us more likely to interpret neutral interactions negatively, to perceive rejection where none exists. The lonely mind becomes hypervigilant, scanning constantly for signs of exclusion until the world itself seems increasingly hostile and unwelcoming. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from outgrowing your former self, while those around you remain unchanged. The friends who once knew you completely now know only a version that no longer exists. The inside jokes feel hollow. The shared references have lost their meaning. You've evolved, but the relationships haven't evolved with you, leaving you stranded between who you were and who you're becoming. The digital age has created new forms of isolation, previously unimaginable. Consider the peculiar loneliness of watching others' lives through the window of social media, seeing the vacation photos, the engagement announcements, the gatherings to which you weren't invited. This isn't just envy. It's a new kind of social pain that our ancestors never had to navigate, the loneliness of being simultaneously connected and excluded. Sometimes loneliness arrives not because people are absent, but because the right people are absent. You might be surrounded by individuals who know your name, your job, your basic biographical details, yet feel that no one truly sees you. Jung called this psychological visibility, the profound relief of being recognized not just physically, but essentially, of having someone witness and validate your authentic self. What if your loneliness contains not just pain, but information? Perhaps it's trying to tell you something important, that certain relationships have run their course, that you've been compromising your values for acceptance, that you've been looking for connection in places unlikely to provide it. Viewed this way, loneliness isn't just an affliction, but a compass, pointing toward a more authentic way of being in the world. There exists a quiet strength in those who have made peace with their solitude. Not in a resigned way, but in the manner of someone who has explored the contours of their aloneness and found something valuable within it. These individuals understand that loneliness, like any landscape, contains not just barren plains, but hidden springs, unexpected vistas, resources invisible to the casual observer. History reveals countless examples of individuals who transformed their isolation into creation. Emily Dickinson rarely left her home, yet produced poetry that continues to illuminate the human condition centuries later. Van Gogh, profoundly alone for much of his life, channeled his suffering into paintings that now move millions. Their loneliness wasn't incidental to their work, but essential to it, the very soil from which their art grew. Consider how differently we might approach loneliness if we saw it not as a problem to be solved, but as a space to be inhabited mindfully. The Japanese concept of ma refers to the meaningful empty space, the pause between musical notes, the empty area in a painting, the silence between words. Perhaps loneliness serves a similar function in a life well lived, providing the necessary emptiness that gives form and meaning to our connections. There's a particular kind of knowledge that comes only through solitude. When the voices of others quiet, when consensus and convention fall away, you begin to discern your own voice more clearly. What do you actually think, feel, believe? Not as a reflection of your culture or social circle, but as an expression of your unique consciousness? This self-knowledge forms the foundation for authentic connection with others. Resilience in loneliness isn't about becoming impervious to the need for others. Rather, it's about developing the capacity to stand firmly in your own experience, to be a compassionate witness to your own suffering, to provide for yourself some of the understanding and validation you naturally seek from others. This self-companionship doesn't replace human connection, but creates a stable core from which genuine relationships can grow. The philosopher Thoreau went to Walden Pond to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life. His experiment in solitude wasn't a rejection of humanity, but an attempt to discover what was truly necessary for a meaningful existence. Your periods of loneliness, whether chosen or imposed, offer a similar opportunity to distinguish between your authentic needs for connection and the social expectations that often masquerade as those needs. There's profound power in naming your experience without judgment. Simply acknowledging, "I am feeling lonely right now," creates a small but significant space between you and the feeling. In that space lies the possibility of choice, not necessarily about whether you feel lonely, but about how you respond to that feeling. Will you let it drive you toward distraction, or can you stay present with it, curious about what it might have to teach? Consider the paradox that those most capable of deep connection are often those who have learned to be at home in their solitude. They bring to relationships not the desperate hunger of unmet need, but the generous fullness of self-knowledge. They offer their presence not to fill a void, but to share an abundance. Their connections are choices rather than necessities, expressions of freedom rather than attempts at escape. The capacity to find meaning in loneliness doesn't develop overnight. Like any skill, it grows through practice, through the accumulation of small moments when you chose to turn toward your isolation rather than away from it. Each time you sit with the discomfort rather than immediately reaching for the phone, each time you use solitary hours for reflection rather than mere distraction, you're developing this essential resilience. What if loneliness, despite its pain, serves as an initiation, a difficult passage that, when traversed consciously, leads to a more authentic way of being? Throughout human history, periods of isolation have been incorporated into rites of passage precisely because they force a confrontation with the self that comfort and constant company allow us to avoid. Your loneliness may be the doorway to a deeper understanding of who you are and what you truly seek. There comes a moment for many when loneliness transforms from something that happens to them into something they can work with intentionally. This shift doesn't eliminate the pain, but it changes your relationship to it. You begin to recognize that while you cannot always control your circumstances, you can cultivate practices that allow you to move through isolation with greater awareness and less suffering. Consider how differently you might approach social connections if you came to them from a place of wholeness rather than lack. What if you sought others not to fill an emptiness, but to share a fullness? This doesn't mean waiting until loneliness disappears before reaching out. Rather, it means developing the capacity to acknowledge your natural human need for connection without making it the sole determinant of your worth or well-being. The journey through loneliness often reveals how much of our suffering comes not from isolation itself, but from our resistance to it. We fight against the experience, judge ourselves for having it, see it as evidence of failure rather than as an inevitable part of human existence. What might change if you could say, "Yes, I am lonely now," with the same simple acknowledgement you might give to physical pain or hunger, as information rather than indictment? There exists a profound difference between being alone and being lonely, a distinction that becomes clearer as you develop a more conscious relationship with solitude. Loneliness contains an element of suffering, a sense of unwanted separation, but solitude, even when it includes moments of loneliness, can also encompass peace, clarity, creativity, and connection to something larger than the individual self or immediate social circle. The capacity to find meaning in suffering, what Frankl called tragic optimism, doesn't require denying the reality of pain. Your loneliness is real. Its effects on your mind and body are measurable. Yet within this very real suffering lies the possibility of choice, not about whether you feel lonely, but about how you interpret that loneliness and what you allow it to create in your life. Consider how your experience of isolation, painful as it may be, has shaped your capacity for empathy. Having known the particular ache of loneliness, you can recognize it in others, even when they lack the words to name it. You notice the person standing slightly apart at the gathering, the forced brightness in someone's social media presence, the hesitation in a colleague's voice when asked about weekend plans. This heightened awareness is not just a wound, but a gift. There's a particular kind of connection that becomes possible only between people who have made peace with their fundamental aloneness. These relationships don't attempt to eliminate the space between self and other, but rather to create a bridge across it, a bridge built on mutual recognition of both our need for connection and the ultimately untranslatable nature of individual consciousness. Such relationships don't deny loneliness, but transform it into something bearable, even beautiful. As you continue this journey, you may discover that the antidote to loneliness isn't constant company, but authentic presence, both with yourself and with others. The quality of your attention matters more than the quantity of your interactions. A single conversation where you feel truly seen might sustain you more than countless superficial exchanges. An hour of intentional solitude might nourish you more deeply than a day spent in distracted togetherness. In the end, perhaps loneliness is not merely a condition to be endured or overcome, but a teacher whose difficult lessons we need. It strips away illusion, confronts us with reality, and asks us to find within ourselves resources we didn't know we possessed. The path through loneliness is rarely linear. You will have days of connection followed by nights of isolation, moments of belonging interrupted by periods of alienation. But with each cycle, you develop greater capacity to carry both experiences with dignity and awareness. The philosopher Rilke advised a young poet to love the questions themselves, to live the questions now, trusting that someday you might gradually live along some distant day into the answer. Your loneliness poses profound questions. Who are you when no one is watching? What do you truly value? What kind of connections would nourish your authentic self rather than just alleviating temporary discomfort? By living these questions fully, by moving through loneliness with consciousness rather than merely trying to escape it, you begin to discover answers that no one else can provide. Remember this: your loneliness does not define you, but neither is it separate from you. It is one thread in the complex tapestry of your humanity, woven alongside joy, curiosity, love, and countless other experiences that together create a life. By acknowledging this thread, by working with it rather than against it, you transform what might have remained merely suffering into something meaningful. A deeper understanding of yourself, a more authentic way of connecting with others, and perhaps most importantly, a compassionate recognition of the fundamental aloneness we all share, even in our most connected moments. And in that recognition lies a paradoxical truth that our very isolation, fully embraced, can become the basis for our most profound connections. As the light fades and these words settle into the quiet spaces of your mind, remember this: your loneliness is not a failure of character, but a testament to your capacity for depth. In a world that often celebrates shallow connections, your yearning for something more meaningful speaks to the richness of your inner life. Perhaps in the end, we are all just solitary travelers walking parallel paths, occasionally reaching across the divide to touch another soul. Brief moments of recognition in the vast expanse of human experience. And maybe that's enough. Not the permanent dissolving of loneliness, but the courage to carry it with grace, to let it soften rather than harden you, to allow it to deepen your compassion for yourself and others. As you step away from these reflections and back into your life, know that your isolation, fully embraced, can become your greatest teacher, revealing not just who you are in the darkness of solitude, but who you might become in the light of genuine connection. If these words have touched something within you, something perhaps too rarely acknowledged, I invite you to share your own reflections in the comments below. How has loneliness shaped your journey? What wisdom has it revealed to you? Your voice matters in this conversation. And if you'd like to continue exploring these deeper dimensions of human experience together, please subscribe to this channel. Each week, we venture into the territories of existence that often remain unspoken, seeking not simple answers but meaningful questions that illuminate our shared path. Thank you for your presence here, for bringing your full attention to these reflections, and, in doing so, creating a moment of genuine connection across the digital divide. Until next time, may you walk with awareness through both your solitude and your connections.